Hello, my badass friends. My name is Cece, and this is my badass life. I sit here today conflicted, and I'm conflicted because I'm getting mixed messages from the people who I respect and admire in terms of my own personal learning and spiritual growth and journey, and also the inner activist advocate in me that says it's important to stand up for other people, it's important to speak out, and also the empath, highly sensitive person in me who can't help but feel other people's pain. And the reason why I'm conflicted is because a few of what I would consider to be my spiritual teachers, because as many of you know, the cancer journey for me sparked a tremendous spiritual awakening and spiritual journey where I started really delving into what I needed to look at in my own world, traumas that I needed to address and overcome, and also a tremendous journey of healing, which also led me into realizing that I had gifts in the area of mediumship and psychism and things like that. And it has been truly a journey of love and awakening and, really coming to a place with spirit where I'm so appreciative, and a lot of my views on certain things have changed in a good way, I would say. And I am considerably more open to a lot of the ways of teaching of what many might consider to be woo-woo practitioners or spiritual teachers, and partly because I had the gift of experiencing that myself. Going through the cancer journey, I worked with a spiritualist medium healer in the Netherlands, and I do firmly believe that, in part, due to her work and the Western medicine, along with my own spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, soul journey, that it led me to achieve remission. And so I'm a firm believer in a lot of these things. And so when one of my teachers says something like, you have to be positive 100% of the time to get through this period of tumult that we're in the world, and get to fully experience the ascended planet. And that definitely sounds woo-woo, I know, to a lot of you, but a lot of these teachers believe that the energy and the consciousness of the planet is shifting, that we're moving into ascension, we're moving from a 3D space to a 5D space. And while you don't need to understand any of that, the bottom line is that it's always darkest before the dawn. There is always great tumult, and there is always darkness before we can reach a point of light and finding peace and love and getting back to that place of humanity. And this has been true in multiple iterations in history, and including even in the Bible. So, but I'm currently conflicted because this one, and it's not just one teacher, but this particular teacher yesterday said, that there are events happening in the world, and they weren't necessarily preordained because we have free will. And a lot of people, especially our leaders in the world, are exercising their free will right now. And instead of following divine guidance, they're exercising their own free will. And that is changing the trajectory of things. And ultimately, if we are still on this trajectory of raising the level of consciousness in the world, which I know for many of us just seems real hard to believe right now, that we'll ever get to a place of peace and love and light. But apparently we're on that journey. But she basically was saying, you have to stay positive all the time, and you shouldn't share any of the negative. And I know that there's another teacher that I work with, a couple actually, who say you should never watch the news. And yet the pragmatist and the realist in me and the empath in me says, isn't that like living in denial that things are actually happening? And I think that's part of the problem, because so many people are living in denial already, or, if it's not affecting them, then they're unconcerned and not speaking out. So I'm incredibly conflicted. Like, I literally feel like I have one foot in 3D and one foot in 5D. And because I feel like if I look away, I'm somehow complicit. I also feel like if I enact what appears like toxic positivity, that not only is that completely unrealistic, but also misleading. And, I don't want to live in denial of the truth of what's occurring. And quite frankly, I understand conceptually that these events are happening to ultimately get us to that shift. But things have to get worse before they get better. And the getting better part is going to require a lot more of us than just the few who are currently speaking up. There are also seers, channelers, psychics who have predicted that this current situation will not last in its current state beyond the next 9 months, which many of us are praying that they're correct. But again, free will can affect that. So even predicting the future becomes unpredictable when you take into account free will. So again, I go back to, I'm super conflicted, because on one hand, I have this empathic, highly sensitive heart that is feeling every ounce of other people's pain, and also have my own concerns for our own situations. I'm a lesbian married to a same-sex partner. I'm a cancer survivor who relies on the ACA for my healthcare, and I can't get private healthcare in America. I also have a pre-existing condition now, and that's why that is. And so all of these changes that are coming through could truly impact me. But right now, I'm concerned about my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, specifically the trans population. I'm concerned about immigrants and how they're being treated. And now I'm concerned about, naturalized citizens and even us birthright citizens, because, again, the kind of snowball effect that's happening. I'm concerned about cancer survivors and other people with chronic illnesses, autoimmune disorders, because we're literally getting rid of all of our ability to research and all of the funding and all of the advancements we've made in all of the years. And then there's also this idea that, you don't want to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. If all of us are out there being fearful and afraid of what's going to happen, and we're speaking that, then, are we speaking truth to power? In other words, are we creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where if we're living in fear all the time, and if we're then perpetuating that fear in others by sharing those, negative things, then, do we end up creating what we don't want but can't stop thinking about, right? If I tell you not to think of a red fire engine, that's what you're going to think about, right? So, I get the concept of the, needing to be positive in your thinking, needing to keep hopeful, but there's also this part of me that's like, but people need to know. So I'm very conflicted. I have this side of me that is such the internal activist, advocate, justice. That's why I'm doing the work that I am right now with colorectal cancer. It's so important to have that advocacy and for people to know that there are other people out there who've been where you've been. And so there's that part of me. And now I have this very spiritual part of me that all I want is just inner peace and to be centered every day. And, I want to, use those powers for good. And on some level, I kind of thought that, I was getting this perfect kind of balance and dovetail because, I'm sharing the things that I believe are relevant because, and I should say we are sharing the things that we believe to be relevant to the current situation if they have the potential to impact somebody who may not have seen them, who either lives in a news desert or who doesn't seek out factual and different sources of information. And I'm doing it also for the people who are experiencing it so that they can feel not alone, so that they can feel camaraderie. I'm sharing these pieces of information to inform people, to provide a fact-checked piece of information that if somebody knows me or us and they trust us, that they know that I'm not going to share something that I haven't researched. I actually read all of Project 2025, and I'm probably about to do the same thing with the Big Ugly Bill. So that just lets you know like how much of a news nerd I am. I have a degree in journalism, so it's hard for me not to do those things. And I'm kind of a research queen, kind of a research nerd. So there's that, and then there's also those one or two people who might possibly take something that I say or that we say and choose to believe it, even though they've been indoctrinated in a different direction. Now, I know those people are rare, but I also know that none of this is my responsibility. I'm not responsible for what's happening, but I also just, again, I don't want to feel complacent, and I don't want to feel like I'm in denial. And so I'm so torn when some of my teachers and mentors are saying, A, you have to protect your own energy first. B, you cannot let your vibration get too low or your frequency get too low, because then you will have trouble connecting. C, you have to remain positive no matter what, because it's essential for raising the consciousness level of the earth. But then again, I'm like, but isn't it important for me to help others see how they too can raise consciousness, so that then we have more people working for the light, not the dark? You can see why this is so confusing for me. So I have this really logical brain and this very justice brain that wants to see, again, I don't necessarily want harm to come to anybody, but I do want the truth, the real truth, to be seen. And I want people to stop being hypocrites. For instance, like don't use God as a means to enact your dark and evil acts. And it just, what it really comes down to is, and I'm realizing this, and yet, again, these are people that I admire. I will have to find my own way, as will you. I will have to find my own way. I will have to find the balance between what I feel is a comfortable level of advocacy and activism, what I feel is a comfortable level of that, and still being able to keep my own vibration higher than the norm. Although I would love for it to be really high and still be able to do that. But it's hard because exposure definitely can bring you down, and it can impact your mental and physical health. I get that. And then that other piece of me that just wants to, help the planet by doing mediumship and healing work and readings and read it and continuing my education in those areas, and just get sucked into that. But I'm going to have to find my balance, and I haven't found it yet, and I'm working on it every day. There are days when I feel like I should just walk away from it all, save yourself. Because, I do think that there ultimately could be some consequences to some, for speaking out, or at least that's the direction that we're heading in. I would like, and again, so my teachers would say, you put out the positive. So the positive is there will be no consequences, because this will end long before we get to the consequences stage. I do believe that good prevails over evil every time. It's just a matter of how long it will take. And so each of us is going to have to find our balance, and also know that there are quiet ways to speak up. There are subtle ways to speak up. Not everybody gets on the internet like I do and gets on social media and talks about it. Um, and there are also ways that you can work on yourself too. There's they talk about shadow work, and basically it's dealing with our shadow selves, our kind of our darker selves, because they say that all of this that is happening is somehow tapping into things that we ourselves need to fix and that we need to work on within ourselves. But we have to do that with grace, and we have to do that with love, and we have to do that with compassion for ourselves. And we can't have compassion for others unless we first have compassion for ourselves. The other thing that trips me up regularly, and again, confused is, or conflicted, is that whole idea of unconditional love. It's hard for me. I can unconditionally love the people who are all in this struggle together, but it's also hard for me to not have that us and them mentality. I think that's hard for all of us. And what I find myself doing, while I can't actually completely have unconditional love for those who are on the opposite side of the fence, I'm trying very hard to at least move light over their way. And sometimes, some people do that with prayer. Some people do that by sending healing energies, or sitting in absent healing. And others simply do that by visually moving light. Like I've been regularly mentally putting columns of light over Washington, D.C. And it sounds crazy and woo-woo and all those things, but, it's a minor thing for me to do to try to, do my part to help the planet and what's happening right now. And also, it doesn't make me have to commit to a place of unconditional love, which I'm not entirely comfortable with yet. And that's hard for me to admit. I want to be that person, but it's real hard when, you see the way that things are playing out, to have empathy for the perpetrators. But I also think that's part of what makes us gullible to the types of propaganda that have led to this to start with. So it's an interesting conundrum. So I'm back to conflicted. I would love to hear from you. How are you conflicted by all of this? How are you managing it? What are the things that you're doing to help raise your vibration? What are the things that you're doing to help to, contribute to making positive change in the world? And I should also say, I am not a person who is completely positive by nature 24/7. I lean positive. I don't lean negative. I lean positive, but I'm also pragmatic. And so that too creates the problem, because my head gets involved a little too much sometimes. And of course, our egos also get involved. They really get in the way. And in fact, our egos try very, very hard to prevent us from getting to a place of enlightenment and ascension, because it almost feels like the ego feels like those things are like the enemy, because once you get to that place, you won't need your ego anymore. And that's a whole different topic. So I would like to say thank you again for staying here, staying with me, and for listening, and for your support. And I'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.